All right, it's Wednesday in this holiday season, and we had snow. That was fun today. If you're in Southern California, snow is this white, fluffy stuff that kind of accumulates. I grew up in Southern California, so it was a whole new thing coming out here. Our Christmases were a little different. So I thought we would just continue this process around mind training. Mind training, just Lojong teachings, I think are just so practical about how do we bring Dharma into our life, how do we use our life in ways that's practical and that we can use. It's not some abstract idea. And so we touched base a bit on some of the 7-point mind training. And last week we talked about positive potentials and how we water these potentials, how they can spring up in our lives, how we can create conditions in our lives to further our path, to remove suffering, to put ourselves in healthy situations, to have good habits. Well, the 5th point in our 7-point, I think, is really a valuable tool for us, the measure of having trained the mind. You know, it's great that we can actually kind of check in. Where am I? Is this working for me? Does this make sense? Is there reasonable expectation that I'm getting better? Otherwise, what are we doing? You know, there's a lot of things we could be doing on Wednesday night. So the measure of having trained the mind, there's 3 parts to it that they look at. And one of them, you know, it starts with right off the point that all dharmas, whatever your dharma is, whatever the practice is, are for one purpose. So, and that purpose is to subdue my self-grasping. So whether we're practicing, you know, breath meditation, or we're practicing different rituals, whether we're doing Lama Rim practice, we're doing whatever our practice is, whatever we're doing in terms of Buddhism or Dharma or path, is it decreasing my self-grasping? Because that's the core of it all. The core of suffering, the core of mental and emotional stress in my life comes from misperception, from a real strong sense that John's pretty damn important. And, you know, life would be really good if you guys would just do what I want you to. That would be, we could run this town, you know. And that creates a lot of problems. And so fundamentally, what I like about Buddhism is that, you know, you don't really have to believe in things. You just start to see what's true. Fundamentally, the foundation working principle is that mental and emotional stress, worries, fears, these mental afflicted states are all based on misunderstanding what's happening. And if I stop misunderstanding what's happening, there's no place for them to come from, because that's their cause. And so these are things that we can test out. There are things that we can apply. Does this make sense? Does that hold up? Can I check it out? That's why debate's really important, and reasoning's important, and science is important. You know, let's hook monks up. Let's see what goes on. You know, let's test this. Let's see what's going on. And there's some things that we can do to start to, first, if we're going to do these practices to subdue self-grasping, well, A, we need to know what that is, but B, we also need to know that that's the source of problems. Because it can feel like self-grasping is the solution, right? Yeah, it can really feel like that a lot. What can I do to make me feel good? What can I do to make me feel okay now, in this moment? And how can I situate my life to bring me pleasure? In which case, I'm pretty much thinking about me a lot. And that really fascinating dynamic comes into play, where I become then the center of the universe. And I start seeing and perceiving the world through my lens as though that's the way it is. And then I find things I like and things I don't like, and then I really try to get the things I like. and try to avoid the things I don't like, and I try to find some happiness in there. Problem is, it doesn't work very well because there's a lot of others out there and a lot of situations that are not going along with my plan. Because I had a plan, and but my plan wasn't for the road to close. My plan wasn't, to get a divorce. My plan was not, to, have the car break down. My plan wasn't, I had a whole different plan. And I have this real insane belief that if things went the way I wanted, I would be happy. I mean, that's really fundamentally core of delusional thinking. And if things go the way I want, I would be really happy. And, the fascinating thing about it is you don't have to be a Buddhist to check that out. I love, I quote Dan Gilbert a lot, Harvard researcher, who just did all this research that says the science of happiness. That fundamentally our human brains can do a lot of things really well. We can, visualize things and build things and solve problems and do that. But one thing we cannot do very well at all is predict the amount of happiness or suffering a future event will give us. We are consistently off the charts wrong all the time. We actually believe that if I get this award, get that degree, get married, get that job, get those things, that I'm going to be happy. That's how I'll be happy. And we spend a lot of time doing that. But how long does the happiness last? 10 minutes, 15, I don't know, hour? Have you been happy for a whole hour? Yeah, probably, but hard to bring it up exactly, but maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, I don't know. Generally, it's much shorter, 10, 15 minutes, maybe a minute. The college degree, I remember getting my college degree. I was so excited, My mom was there, I don't know, am I supposed to plaster that around, wear it all over? I have this college degree. This is happy, look at this. But pretty much, I don't know what happened, but I could visualize me going out to the parking lot, a little stressed, trying to get out of the parking lot because of all the other cars. And, now I'm caught up in life. And so the fascinating piece is that we're so confused that we don't notice all this. And we just think the next thing will make me happy. I got the college degree, I got the marriage, I got this, whatever. And then I was worried and I was stressed. And then the things that I think will make me happy are the things I stress and worry about. And then I lose those things. I lose my health, I lose my relationships, or I lose my job, or, my kids grow up and move out. I don't know. That's just wrong. At some points it's okay, but it depends on the day.
My parents were okay with that.
Your parents were okay with that, yeah. It wasn't so bad that my daughter moved out. It's just that all the friends stopped coming over. It's like, it was the place. There was always something going on. It's just me. Yeah. And things change. So the thing is that we're so caught up in these delusional ways of just engaging the world as though it is, and just focused on self and what I want, what I think, and what I like, and what I don't like. And I try to build this world and make it a certain way, and try to get the friends I like, and try to avoid these other crazy people over here, and then somehow this is all going to work, and I'm going to live till I'm whatever age I deem I'll live to, and I'll have some happiness, and that's what life's all about. Except that world doesn't exist anywhere, and the world doesn't work like that. And I'm shocked when it doesn't. That's the weird thing. I'm really shocked when it doesn't. So all this comes from a sense of self-grasping that really has how I experience and perceive the world to be just really fundamentally important. And I really see myself in a particular way that's separate and different from you. And a very common statement in our culture is I'm taking care of me and mine. You want a recipe for stress, worry, fear, and struggle? Take care of you and yours. Because when I'm taking care of me and mine, I'm now in conflict with 7 billion of you. Because you're taking care of you and yours. And we're getting in the way. And a lot of times you're in my way on the roads. You got my parking spots. We're competing for jobs. Sometimes you take the last little apple tart on the plate before I got to it. Frustrating. All of which leads me to be discontent or competitive, or how do I see myself in the world in comparison to others? You know, we compare ourselves a lot. It's pretty interesting. Those people like I have it all together, or I try to impress people. I try to see where I am in the world in relation to others. And this is done very subtly. So we engage in these 8 worldly concerns, and getting what I want, trying not to lose it, seeking a lot of pleasure, trying to avoid pain. I like praise. I don't like criticism. And I want a good reputation, not a bad one. And that's the focus of my existence, self. And this actually sets off a whole wheel of suffering. So the earlier parts of mind training have you look for that self that I'm clinging to, that's John. And, I kind of find out that he really doesn't exist. He's a concept I'm carrying with me. John's a morning person, John's a night person. John's a good guy, John's kind of a jerk, John's, a good dancer, not a good dancer. John's kind of patient or not patient. I have all these ideas about what John is, and labels that I apply. But if I start looking at them, none of those hold up. I was never a morning person. These days I get up at 4:30 pretty much every day and do things. But I didn't used to be a morning person. Now someone might call me a morning person. But I'll tell you what, waking up this morning, my head was saying, go back to sleep, man. You don't need to do this. You really don't. It was strong. Am I a patient person? Well, you know what? Not when I'm impatient. Am I a father? Well, I have a child, but right now I'm kind of a Dharma teacher. And a little while ago, I was a pedestrian, and sometimes I'm a stranger. Sometimes I'm a consumer. Like all these labels come up and they come and go. And the John that I keep identifying with and grasping so much, well, he's changing all the time. I'm not who I was a year ago, and that was a day ago, and tomorrow. So the John that exists, that we can kind of try to pin down as a concept, well, is changing moment to moment. And I'm learning new things, and I'm having new interactions, and I'm seeing things differently as each day comes and goes. There's no static, non-changing John that I'm dragging around every day, putting clothes on. There's a body, but even that changes, right? God, it changes. It's sad. I used to be fit. They tell me it could happen again. Unfortunately, it would require exercise and eating healthy. There'll be some effort there. I'm really going to do it. It's going to happen. Maybe. So, but the body changes, the John changes, the ideas of myself change, the way I perceive the world changes. So this John that I'm so attached to, where does he exist? And then how's he so separate from you? Right? How's he so separate from you? And then we get into the understanding about my clothing and my food and the language I use and how I perceive the world, which is dependent upon everybody else that planted seeds and harvest food and packaged things and created commercials to make me buy this particular microphone over that other microphone. the industries and the words I use and the language that I use. All this has happened because of so many others. Like there's nothing I have in my life, anything, the most smallest thing that I can have. How many people were involved for me to have a mala? I mean, we can't even count them. There's no way. So I'm not so separate. I'm not independently separate from anyone or anything. Food. I love the food analogy. I mean, I could go on to the whole thing where it all comes from, but just think about at food. I think about food, I eat it, and at one point, we'll go back to the apple tart, because I'm thinking, I don't know why I'm pointing to you. You wouldn't have taken the apple tart, right? No. But it's an apple tart, and it's a label. I put it's food. I taste it. I like it, and I start chewing it. At some point, it stops being food and starts being me, right? At some point, it was food. Now it's me. Now it's me. And then after a while, it's not me. And I want nothing to do with that previous apple tart. But this is much more how life is. It's changing. It's interdependent. These barriers about me and you are not as firm as they perceive. And how I perceive and interact with you has a lot to do with whether I had enough sleep last night and how I was raised and, the way I kind of view the world and the culture I was raised in and how I see people. And so having understand all of this, we can talk about it, but how's that work? So we have these practices, and that's where we're at this point. Now, the practices that we use, do the practices we use help us lessen the delusion of a separate entity of John that's creating all of these problems or not? So that's our first measurement. Am I increasing my self-grasping, or am I decreasing it? Am I, instead of, it's me and mine, maybe I'm starting to see a little more we and ours, and an interdependence and an impermanence, the nature of how things come and go and come together. And the thing is that valuable? If I'm thinking about myself more and me and mine, will that get me what I want? Well, that's to be investigated. Don't take my word for it, but you can investigate that. Is focusing on taking care of you and yours and focusing on yourself to be happy, to get what you want, to try to avoid losing it. Is that a recipe for inner peace, well-being, and that people want? So we have to investigate that. Does that hold up? Does it work? One very simple way of testing that is to notice what happens when you focus on yourself, primarily. You can just focus on, we just did a little meditation. We focus on ourselves. We sit in here and we start focusing on ourselves. Just sitting in that chair can become very uncomfortable. Have you ever noticed that? The more I just focus, man, and whereas if I'm watching a show or distracted or, doing something creative, in that chair, I'm not even noticing the chair because I'm not focused on me. I'm focused on something else. And there's actually no pain all of a sudden. I'm looking, taking what good sign. But if it's me, my world gets smaller. And then, when I start thinking about it is, and this is, again, I'll just come back to some of the science around, there's a technical word for it. It's the default mode within neuroscience, default mode. Default mode is, let's say I'm not actively engaged in thinking about something else, doing something else actively, right? So I'm not working on a project, I'm not planning something, I don't particularly have to think or engage with something. Generally, the default mode comes right to us. And then our mind starts thinking about, gee, what would be good to do? Gee, what do I have to worry about? Gee, and then it just comes right here. And what the science has shown that the more time we spend in the default mode, the more stress, worry, fear, anxiety we have, the more discontent. Because we're automatically thinking about, what happens when you get somewhere, you start thinking, well, what do I do next? Plant yourself on the beach, get the chair set up. Oh, well, what's my snack? You know, like it just the mind, you know, I'm just stuck here, but already, you know, what kind of snack do I have? Do you do that? You know, and is this a good spot? You know, it's just, you know, the mind's just incessantly. When it's me, it's just what's going to just bring me what I need and well, actually what I want, and so there's no satisfaction there. It's just this me. But if I start to you know, recognize this interdependent world that we live in, I start thinking about others and how things arise, will I find more relief when I'm engaged with others, doing things with others, you know, doing things that are contributing to society? Do I feel better about that? So that's just a sort of an entry point. But fundamentally, what if my interactions were free of greed, jealousy, envy, resentment, anxiety, all of which are dependent upon a very me-centered attitude? There's a very common denominator in anxiety. It's worrying about me, what you think of me, what others might think of me, how I would like the world to be. It's a very me-centered self-grasping. Those things don't arise otherwise. I mean, what would it be like if we actually engaged in our situations with whoever we're dealing with, whatever we're doing, with a we-centered attitude about, well, I'm meeting you. Let me be curious about you. What are we doing together? You know, here's a problem. What would be best for all of us? Instead of, what would be best for me? Are you someone I like or don't like? Do you have something to offer me? Are you someone who's going to drain me? You know, all of a sudden it's me. I start factoring in there, and you could already start to see there's people that I start assigning value to, and people I like and people I don't like, and people I think are idiots and people I think are just, you know, really funny. And you know what the common denominator in all those things are when we start recognizing the people that we really like, enjoy being around? Well, they think a lot like me, and they have my values, and they have my worldview. And if they don't, then clearly they're idiots. You know, like, really, who could think like that? That's crazy. But we do this so on autopilot that it takes practice to shift. It really takes a practice to start shifting, being a little more accurate, and noticing how I'm creating my own jealousy and envy and resentment and discontent. And that's what they're saying is my practice helping me or not? Am I becoming less attached to a sense of self that doesn't exist, that creates these problems? Or am I creating a stronger sense of self? And that does happen with Dharma practice. It can really happen with Dharma practice. Oh man, I've studied, you know how many texts I've studied? You know, let me quote. Somebody starts, I once early on when they had more early days in computer land, and they had these forums, and I was a Buddhist monk at the time. I joined this Buddhist forum, and someone would post a thought or an idea, and then all these people would just attack each other on this Buddhist forum, saying, that's not the right view, this is the way you do that, and this is that, and it was this whole thing, and I thought, wow, I don't think this is alleviating suffering. You know, and this, you know, it's like, whoa, you know, I got out of there. You know, because then we can, you know, show how much we know. And so a lot of people like to get online, show how much they know, whether it's Dharma or whether it's, you know, economics or whether it's yoga or whatever, you know, here's the way we do that. And so we can have the best of tools that actually reduce suffering and use them to increase my pride, my arrogance, my, you know, intolerance towards others. So these are important things to check out in this. Then it says, well, all of these practices, are they lessening my self-grasping, or am I actually, you know, getting attached a little more to this stuff? And so, a lot of people, whether it's Buddhism or whatever we do, we might get more attached, have fancier altars and do that, and then talk about, how many empowerments I've been to? I've been to a lot. How many times I saw Dalai Lama? Let me tell you. And, or our charities, how much I support them? Yeah, I got a plaque over there. My name's on it. So is that reducing my attachment to self, or is it increasing? That's something to explore. Am I doing practices that help me jar myself out of my automatic default mode of being primarily interested in making me feel good as much as possible? Or not? Or am I seeing a way of eliminating the actual source of my mental and emotional suffering? Am I engaged in practices that help me live more in accordance with reality, applying a sense of wisdom in our lives to help me see clearly? So the first measure is starting to recognize that. The second one, any questions on that one? Any thoughts? I think to pause, and I'll just pause because we have people online. So I know some people say, you never make time for questions. Never is a strong word. So I am making time. So if there's anyone online who has a question or something, I'll just pause for a minute, take a sip of water. Yeah.
Do you have technique for noticing whether or not your actions, like, people watch, you set an alarm? Is there a technique for reminding yourself to notice whether or not you're engaged in practices that those are self-practicing?
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't sit on our cushion, that much, right, out of our lives. So, with the practices of our tradition, which I find really helpful, is to start my day with some meditation, set an intention, I do some practices, and then I bear in mind a particular thing I want to work on. So let's say I want to be more patient. I bring up patience a lot because it's the antidote to anger. It's one of the most powerful tools that we can solve many problems with, and it's also one of the most powerful skills that we can develop to deal with most mental afflictions. Patience. With patience, you'll notice irritations can come and go. And you don't have to react. And with patience, that's what patience is. You're patient in this uncomfortable situation and irritation or something like that. So let's say I do my practices, I meditate, I set my thing for the day, and I say, well, I'm going to be patient today. That's what I'm going to work on. So as much as possible, I'm going to try to work on being patient. But I'm going to set an alarm on my phone for every 2 hours. That's the way I do it. I do 2 hours, and my phone will go off in 2 hours, and it'll remind me that, I go through a whole thing. This is a day that'll never come again. I have this rare and precious human rebirth. I just remind myself of everything I did in the morning. Boom. 2 hours later, I have a little reminder. Guess what? All the conditions are ripened for you to have this incredible life. What are you doing with it? Oh, I was going to be patient. And so I have a little reminder, and then I try to hang in there for another 2 hours, and I get a little reminder. Some people use things like, Post-it notes. Like I have a friend who drives a lot, like from job to job, and she puts a Post-it note on her car. So every time she gets in her car, she sees that. Phones like that don't always work very well because it'll often go off and you're doing something. So you just pause it and then you don't think about it again. And then you never even reset it. And next thing you know, it's 4 hours later. So sometimes these work out. I once, when I was a school teacher, I would create a sheet to check in 6 times a day. And since I had a schedule, you know, as a school teacher, we had periods. I knew at 11:14, you know, was the break between, you know, third period and fourth. And I would write down, I would set the times I'm going to check in. And I'd write that on my sheet. So in between third and fourth period, I'd go check in. So a variety of methods, and I've helped a lot of people try to get those. A real simple one is before you eat. People generally eat, you know, a few times a day, and it's nice to, before you eat, take a little time to remind yourself. Another method is when you go to the bathroom. So there are these different techniques that people use. The monks in the old days, I was trained in keeping track of vows, you know, because we have a lot of vows. So you check in every so often. In the old days, and this wasn't me, but just I learned what they used to do is they had like little white and black pebbles that they rocks in a little bag. And at the end of the day, they'd see how many they had of which color to kind of check in on their mind. So the thing is to find one that works in your life, and it's worth playing with. But so valuable to have a reminder, because we just lose it, you know. I'll notice that if I don't, you know, and I've been doing this for a while, but if it goes off and, you know, there's a button there that will restart it for 2 more hours or not. And there's times I don't even hit that. You know, like it went off, I was talking, and, you know, the whole rest of the day I didn't hit it. So it's, you know, it is something. You're welcome. Nothing else popped up online?
Nothing online.
All right. Oh, yeah.
So is the general idea to train yourself, let's say, to be compassionate, by reminding yourself every 2 hours, and you go back in that mode every 2 hours? So is the concept, I'm like a bottom line guy, is the concept to try to be that compassionate more often? Is that being successful, or is it being more compassionate one day or less compassionate the next day? Am I improving by being more compassionate or being compassionate more often? Or, I mean, how do you measure compassion? You know, I'm compassionate.
Yeah, so
is it the depth of it? You know, like today I'm compassionate to everybody I meet, but there's some people that I really don't like, and I'll never get there. And then maybe sometime I'll get there. So am I more compassionate then, or?
Yeah, so one of the key things is to never micromanage. That's, you know, this idea, and it comes a lot with meditation, typically. I had a good meditation, I had bad meditation. If you followed the directions, you did a good meditation. And over 6 months is the meditation, you know, helping me. So in this type of checking, I would, you know, check a month or 3 months or 6 months. And then, so if particularly I was working on compassion, I can get kind of self-obsessed around compassion, in which case, what am I doing? I'm increasing my self-grasping, because now I'm pretty focused on how compassionate I am. Now I've just increased my self-grasping instead of decreased it. So everything that we do, we can turn it into just another way of suffering, and then beat ourselves up for not being very compassionate, even though I'm trying to be compassionate, right? We are so good at this. We're nuts, you know, it's wild. So the thing is my practice of compassion subduing my self-grasping, or is it increasing it over time? The thing about being compassionate is that, and that's in the earlier teachings, we're on the 5th point, around the 2 bodhicittas, the great compassion that we're practicing. As we start practice, we do some practice around compassion, and we'll find that some days we're better than others, some moments are better than others, they'll come and they'll go. And we have to remember that compassion, you know, when we talk about depth of compassion or not, compassion is about removing suffering. So sometimes compassion is setting a boundary with someone, because that'll remove suffering. So that doesn't look very compassionate sometimes, but it's the best thing. Is so out of compassion is my motivation to remove suffering. So what's the healthiest thing for this interaction with this human being? And sometimes that is to hold someone accountable to something. And sometimes it's to really show them a great kindness or a generosity. So it's going to look different sometimes. And I think compassion then becomes much more about the skill of trying to, as we be more kind and compassionate, is we become more skillful in how do we reduce suffering. And because we can have enabling behaviors that aren't very compassionate, and we can have some kind things that we do that are really self-centered, you know. And so it's a skillful thing that we learn over time. When we get to this third piece here, which I haven't got to yet, the measure will be that my compassion more naturally arises. It just becomes more automatic. So, for example, when you first comment was saying there's some people I'll never be compassionate towards, and the question is to challenge that, because we don't know. You don't know what you'll be like in 10 years, and I didn't know, and that was the talk last week. I had no idea at some point that I would be a monk, or that I would, think, or any of the things that I've done in my life. If I were to go back 20 years and somebody told me, you're going to be like nice to somebody, like, no, not going to happen. But what happens is, as we water seeds, as we practice, our potentials grow. And sometimes we'll find ourselves completely patient and kind with people we would have never imagined. So we don't know. And I know you immediately went, well, maybe I will. Maybe I will. But it's a practice. And the important part to grow compassion is to have self-compassion and not get caught up on how compassionate I am or not. And kind of when I do my check-ins, I know you've done some of the training, is skillful and unskillful. I have a friend, he likes to write, here's my skillful action and here's my not yet skillful action. I'm working on it. And, I think, so, because we're hard on ourselves. We're very goal-oriented too. And
right from what you just said,
yeah.
You could walk up to someone and have an exchange, and you could feel you're being compassionate. Like you see something that hurts their lives, or something they do hurts their relations with other people that they don't really see. And you can have that exchange and you walk away from them, and the guy can turn around, or girl or whatever, and say, boy, that guy's not very compassionate. But you feel you're being very compassionate.
Right.
So,
and that actually a good segue into our next point, which is what's the wording on it? It's the chief of two. Rely on the chief of two witnesses, and of the two witnesses, there's others and self. The chief one is self. Rely on ourself, because no one else can read our mind. No one else knows what our intent was. When others are gone, we're still here. And so we'll unpack that a little bit, is that we rely on the chief of two witnesses. So what others reflect to us is important and helpful, but more so is our own awareness of our own motivations and our own thoughts. And that's what we rely on. What was our intention? That's what matters most. Yeah. But before I unpack that one, was there another? Yeah.
What happens if you attain that state and you no longer return to the default mode of self? What then? What's left of you? How do you engage life? I know, I presume you haven't reached that state exactly. You still have your own struggles, but there must be people who have reached that state. Is that enlightenment? Do you function normally at that point, or are you just wearing a robe and hanging out on top of the mountaintop?
No, you don't have to wear robes to do that, and yeah, I get it. Yeah. So the real source is not that there's not a self, but to recognize what your self is, which is much, and generally much more than our body. And that's what we tend to identify with. So, and so this is in the earlier teachings of this. One way to get there that's really helpful is to start identifying more with my awareness that is aware of John sitting here. So you start identifying more with the awareness that gives rise to a thought, not the thoughts. The awareness that feels this body is that's getting much closer to a self that exists in some way. It's still interdependent, and it's going to lead to that. So the analogy that they use is and that you get the ability to observe as you're aware that you're kind of like playing a role, like an actor. Like right now, I'm playing the role of a human being named John. But I'm not identified with the human being named John. I'm identified with the awareness that's linked to the human being named John. And so I can function, feel, have all of these feelings and thoughts engage with you in a much more free, much more effective, much more accurate way when I'm not all wrapped up in John. And observing. So this ability to observe mindfully the role that I'm playing in this moment, and to be a good human being named John, and to use this body that I'm in to its highest potentials, so that I can become enlightened and work for the benefit of all beings. And as people are, do realize, and it's a degree. It's not, there's in general degrees of realization that we reach where we'll be less attached to the notion of John and more aware of the role I'm perceiving myself in. And as that happens with practice, time, you start to notice this. It just starts becoming a nature, and it's more comfortable, and you're able to be much more empathetic, much more connected. It's actually not disconnected, it's more connected and more engaged, because I don't have the thing that's blocking me from connecting with you, which is a real strong sense of John, what John wants, as opposed to how John's an interdependently arising being, independence upon you and what we're doing, and here as part of something much bigger than, whether or not I want an apple tart later, which wouldn't be bad, except it wouldn't get me fit. Anyway, I'll work on that. Yeah. So the practice then becomes to develop a level or an ability, and that's why we meditate. You'll notice when we meditated, we're developing our attention. And if we do, if we create good conditions, we meditate daily, we're able to be more present in the moments, and we'll start to notice thoughts and feelings instead of already be in them, which is what we tend to be. I have a thought, I have a feeling. I am that thought, I am that feeling. And you start to be able to observe more. And then you start engaging in these practices during the day where you're more mindful, like those little timers and so forth. And you can start observing yourself in real time as you're speaking, as you're feeling something, as you're noting someone, you're seeing the label come up. They're that kind of person, they're this, you just, and you can observe those are just labels appearing based on what I'm bringing to it, and not be hooked by them, just notice them and keep coming back to how I'm perceiving them. And so as you develop this tool of mindfulness, what happens is you start to develop the ability to use as little elaboration as possible, because that's where we get stuck. Elaboration means, as soon as I see this cup, that's a yellow cup, that's kind of a nice cup, I like this cup, it's kind of like a flower pot. I'm filling in all these details about this cup, you know, and I know who gave us this cup. And so there's a nice feeling around who gave me this cup. It looks like a flower pot, and I kind of like this cup, and there's this thing. You know, it's my cup. You know, and if this cup breaks, you know, it'll be pretty tragic. As opposed to, there's a ceramic, you know, there's a container for hot water that's yellow and has a handle, and I can use it. And so I fill in as little detail as necessary. As I see a person, tall, short, they're dressed like this, you know, we just start filling in their thing. As we start engaging with, they're this kind of person or that, and we just fill in a whole story. And that's the elaborative process, right? I hear a sound. It's just a sound. It's just noise, just sound. And then my mind says, well, that's a bird. And I go, I like birds. It's a beautiful sound. Oh, that's elaboration. I'm meditating. It's a sound. It's a bird. I'm annoyed because I'm trying to meditate and the damn thing's sitting out there. I'm trying to, you know, I'm elaborating. The suffering's not coming. The sound itself is not affecting you until you start elaborating. A person doing something, we could watch a person do something and it can be annoying as heck. And someone could do the same thing and not be annoying. You know, I'm elaborating, I'm filling in. So, so what happens with this practice over time is I elaborate as much as necessary, but I keep it at the basis because the rest of it's me filling it in. Like, you know, I'm coloring in my little coloring book, you know, how people are and what they are and the labels I start sticking on them. You know, they're a Republican, they're a Democrat, they're a liberal, they're this or that. And then all the feelings that come with that elaboration. You know, and that's where the suffering comes from. The person's just talking to me. But a human being talking to me can be painful or pleasant or neutral. And they could even be saying the same words. But if they're sharing it from a perspective of a label of Republican or Democrat or different, the same words being said to me by a human being can have a totally different influence on how I'm interacting with that person. And that's all elaboration. And so they're words, human, that makes sense. I need to hear the words. What are they sharing? What's a skillful way to respond? I don't need to paint all the stories about what kind of person it is, what their motives are. We do a lot of brain, you know, what's it, mind reading, right? I know what they meant. Yeah. A teacher told me, stop mind reading. You're not good at it. And, it's just not very helpful. And, you know, so these elaborative processes. So you can function really well just by, you know, keeping my attention with what is helpful and accurate. But we do need to fill in. Sometimes you need to elaborate right away. Someone comes in that door and they have a gun, boom. You know, I'm filling a picture. This could be dangerous. You know, what do we need to do? You fill it in quick. So it's very helpful to elaborate, pick up cues that are very helpful, but we tend to do it too much and in really unhelpful ways. And so you just want to scale it up as necessary. So experience human, because then we get all caught up and then we have the best meal ever, the most wondrous vacation ever, the worst day ever, the longest day, you know, this is all stories. You know, it's still pretty much just Wednesday. And, but some things happen this way or that way, but I'll elaborate. And this is where our mental emotional suffering comes from. Pretty wild. Yeah, Adam.
So elaboration is basically the same thing as attribution?
Yeah, well, so we're giving attributes to things, right? Qualities and attributes. Yeah, elaboration, though, includes the stories that come with it. You know, because you can have attributes to things, like what are the qualities, you know, of a table and a leg, and those are pretty functional. But as we elaborate, we're going to say this is a beautiful table. As opposed to, you know, an attribute would be there are legs on the table. So attributes can't, you know, necessarily not won't get you there as much, you know, but we'll start going, that's a really beautiful table. I wish I had a table like that. You know,
You'd be happy if you had that.
I would be happy with a table like this. Yeah. And So, but the attributes are important to help us identify that's the table and these are things. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, so that's the big piece that, you know, again, this is like going back to the start of this where we start to unpack how we experience the world is really a subjective experience. You know, whether I think someone's an annoying or pleasant or unpleasant or jerk or that, well, you know, it's all subjective based on how I feel, how I view them, what attitude I'm bringing to them, what I know about them, and what I don't know about them. I have no idea that they volunteer at this, you know, hospice every other week. I don't know that, and I'm thinking they're a jerk, right? You know, if I knew about this, maybe I'd think differently. But the thing is, we don't know. We just take the world as we see it, and then that's the way it is. And they're a jerk, and they're, you know, that selfish and that. And then, well, actually, people, have you ever said that about someone? Man, that person's so selfish. I know we've all said that. Have you ever been selfish? Yeah. No, of course not you, but like I've been selfish a lot, you know, like, am I selfish? Yeah, at times. And guess what? So is everybody else. But that person, they're selfish. Like, that's all they are. Like, they've never been kind. They've never helped somebody, you know. So we just nano in on something. And then we just, that stick the label. They're selfish, man. And every time I see one, I say, that's a selfish person. You know, and we don't even question it. And someone might even tell you how nice they are. No, they're selfish. Let me tell you what they did. Like once or twice, you know. So this is how we elaborate, we fill in these stories, and we forget that what we're having is a subjective experience of people. Now, there's tangible things, right? There are people who do harmful things, and we address those. But can someone do a harmful thing and still do a good thing? Chances are we've all done these. You know, I have friends who, you know, been 20 years in San Quentin who are incredibly kind, wonderful people who contribute to society now, but you would not have thought that about them 20 years ago, right? And also, I know some really kind people who have helped and then got gambling addictions and did some pretty horrific things around their family and communities. And are they bad people or good people? Well, they're humans. And based on their confusions and desire to be happy, they do some things. But those are all transitory, and we still need to hold them accountable and create a culture where you know, there's safety and reward and accountability. But understand that that's always impermanent, and that people that do harmful things could also do good things. That, you know, nobody's stagnant. We don't get stuck, and so pretty healthy people can become unhealthy, and pretty unhealthy people can become healthy, and mentally and emotionally. But we don't see it. We stick a label, and that's what they are. And we'll have someone from 10 years ago. You know, like, I know what they're like. I went to school with them 10 years ago. Really? They do that. It's like, yeah, I was a roommate in college. I'll tell you what they're like. 10 years? I mean, my God, what I was like 10 years ago. I mean, I don't know. So we change. But our mind doesn't update. So this is how our mind, by misperceiving things and forgetting that I'm having a subjective experience, reifies other people and things and sticks labels, and then I'm reactive to those things and that person that I knew 10 years ago when they walk into a room, and I'm either really happy or really, you know, not happy. And yet, how much have they changed in 10 years one way or another? I don't know. Let's, you know, not elaborate on it. Let's see how they are. Hey, you know, let's talk. So if we start practicing like that, are we doing practices that help us eliminate sort of this, you know, me first, me self cherishing first that creates a lot of suffering? So I mean, I don't think it's weird. It might be unusual. One of my practice. So I got to live with some friends of mine, and we were, you know, we're Buddhist practitioners, and we lived a bit in a communal sort of way. And when you're with them, you can practice starting talking about reality, which you can't do at work because people think you're weird. And so we, merely labeled John, would merely label John like to have, a meal with us. And then we'd eat the meal and merely label John as the merely labeled dish that we'll call an apple tart touches my mouth, has a delicious experience, which is more accurately what's happening. And what happens is when you get to practice talking like that and experience it, it helped me to start to see and experience things more like that. Merely labeled John is, experiencing some irritation, hadn't had much sleep last night, and is experiencing this conversation in a bit challenging way. Which, you don't talk like that at work. It's not going to be very functional. But if you're with friends who are practicing Dharma, we kind of practice doing this when we were having a meal and having a conversation. And it was helpful for me because I started thinking that way more. And so it was a tool that helped me start to understand that the deliciousness wasn't, in the tart. It was the experience and, and how these things are. And I got to experience things more as they were. It was really helpful. So that was a practice that did help me, in my measurement. I still think that way a lot now, but it was helpful to be able to verbalize that. Try to speak accurately for a day. I mean, it's good luck. Things we say are pretty exaggerated most of the time. I mean, we don't even have to get in labels. We just exaggerate. Man, you're just killing me. Really? I go on, but I'm going to be good. So that's another tool. So if you want a tool to start noticing, you start noticing how much we exaggerate. You try to just do it for an hour or so because, it's a lot. But just notice what we say and how accurate or inaccurate it is. Just the way we talk, it exaggerates. Oh, wow, we didn't get to that. So next week, if we're alive and here, we'll get to the second. So within this measure, the measure of having trained the mind, one is, are my practices helping me loosen my delusional thinking about, John being the center of the universe? And the next one is to notice how I start to feel about myself of these two witnesses. The thing about noticing if we've made improvement is, how do I act when you're not in the room? So again, chief witness, I'll be here, you won't. I'm going to know how, what my real motives are, or whatever we're doing. So it's really helpful to rely on that. And then the third one, which is great, is constantly rely constantly on happiness. In other words, are you happier? This is working if you're happier more. The whole point would be you would be, and not just perky happy, but a sense of well-being, a sense of things are okay, that I'm not as stressed as I used to. I have less jealousy, less resentment, that, I can engage with people a little more, and, that there's a lessening of that there's a greater sense of well-being. And that's what is going to be the ultimate, by doing this, do I have a greater sense of well-being and some more happiness and less mental and emotional suffering? That's a good measurement, So the other two we'll get to next week. Apparently, we went from 7 to 7:30 pretty quick. So I'm sorry if there was any question waiting online.
No questions waiting.
All right, good. All right, well, let's dedicate this time that we've had together here for the benefit of all sentient beings. So let us dedicate the wisdom and the merit that we have accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes, both individually and collectively. We dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and find true awakening. And may we be able to use the merit and the wisdom accumulated here today to lessen our self-grasping, to cultivate wisdom to see clearly, compassion to live wisely, and recognize our own Buddha nature, awakening so we can truly be a benefit to all sentient beings.